Hi, I'm Carol Owens, and this is Stockbridge Updates. You know, there's so much fun, good news in Stockbridge right now. We have plans for our third annual farmers market, which has been a great success. People have loved it. And what's nice is the farmers have loved it. They report they're making good profits. And Arbor Day, which is April 25th, I believe, this year, we are going to become a tree city, Stockbridge, which is going to be very beautiful, and we're excited about that. And the sad part is that all of this is happening in kind of a cloud, sort of wafting out of Washington, so that the farmers market people are very worried that if the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, if the SNAP program is discontinued, people won't be able to afford to come to the farmers market. And at the same time, farmers are struggling because the farm assistance programs have been frozen. It doesn't mean they've been cut, but uncertainty sometimes can be as bad as disappointment. So they don't know what's going to happen next. So there's good news and bad news, kind of like the winter we just had. It seemed to have been a winter of slips, falls, and flu. And we wish all our friends and neighbors to get well. Quick, spring is coming. So we wish them well. I'm excited because I have a very interesting guest, and you're going to love him as much as I do. His name is Lou Schroeder, and he is a deep lover of Berkshire Cottages, and he puts his money where his mouth is, and he is a generous supporter of Ventfort Hall, the Museum of the Gilded Age. So, Lou, welcome.
Thank you, Carol. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Oh,
particularly since my cottage interest was really boosted originally by your book.
Oh, my goodness. That's wonderful.
And I think in the introduction you said that this was the book that I hoped to find, and that's why you wrote it, because it didn't exist. And it certainly was the book that I found and really started putting things together.
Well, that's wonderful. Tell me when you saw your first cottage or your first major piece of architecture.
Well, that would be when my parents shipped me off to military school at 12 years old at Oheka Castle in Cold Spring Hills, New York. And that was the cottage, the party house of Otto Henry Kahn, designed by Delano and Aldrich. And the academics were simple enough for me, but the building was beyond anyone's imagination. It was so vast. I think it's over 120,000 square feet. Today it's the second largest home in America that's occupied by an owner, the first being the Biltmore.
Yeah.
And I always just wondered what was behind that door, what was beyond that hallway. You didn't have access to very much.
It does so much spark the imagination. I was about the same age as you. I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and my elementary school was just around the corner from Lake Calhoun. And all the major manufacturers like 3M and Betty Crocker and Pillsbury, all of whom were in Minnesota, had their houses around Lake Calhoun, and they were phenomenal houses. And I used to duck out every recess and every lunch hour, and I wasn't supposed to, and leave the playground, which was verboten, and go to Lake Calhoun and knock on the kitchen doors and ask, could I please come in and see? And I was just a little blonde girl, 12 years old with pigtails, so they all let me in.
A great way to get into one of the cottages.
Well, and they spark the imagination. I think that's what you were saying.
Oh, absolutely. The architecture, but then moreover the owners, the reason the houses were built, and their involvement, and then ultimately their contributions to whether it's the arts or industrialization, inventions, business in general. It's sort of the backbone of America, and the Gilded Age sort of, highlighted their success.
It's kind of interesting. It's sort of the opposite of today. Today we're watching the super wealthy want to cut everything, and back during the Gilded Age, the economic elite were endowing everything. Our museums, our hospitals, the first laying-in hospital for women, our major museums, our educational facilities, our first orphanages. So what you're saying is really, really very true.
It is definitely true. Then the family left Long Island, sold a 90-year-old furniture business started by my great-grandfather.
This is your family?
My family.
Mm-hmm.
And moved to the Berkshires. While I was at Cornell University in the Hotel and Restaurant Administration
mm-hmm.
school. 2 years, honestly, I was bored. It seemed like it was going to be too repetitious. But I should point out, you learn more than cooking there, and it did give, a good business background.
But you still felt like you had some free time.
Oh, definitely. Definitely had the free time. And so I came to the Berkshires with a lot of good education, particularly from the Petty School, where I was a proud graduate. And now from a couple of houses that they had designed, very simple houses in neighborhoods on Long Island, now we moved to 49 Cliffwood Street.
Oh, my.
And an irony there is that this was Sunny Ridge 2. Originally, Sunny Ridge was built not around the 1860s, 68.
Yeah. And
it burned down in 1925 and was rebuilt for another relative of the Folsom family. And the irony there is that was also designed by Delano and Aldrich, as was Oheka Castle.
Yeah.
And
so you found another house you loved.
Yes. It was a first experience with more than one staircase, 8 fireplaces, 8 bathrooms. And I just felt like I had to have this. I had to have something like this. But of course, you're in your parents' house. It's not yours. I really started with nothing. But I started a welding shop, fabrication business in the carriage house, and quickly moved off to West Stockbridge, where I bought a property, and then to Richmond, Mass.
What was someday owning a Berkshire cottage a motivation in your business endeavor?
No.
Okay.
Early on in the mid '70s, I was a fire escape builder, and the Bible Speaks call. In fact, it's a day I'll never forget. I'm by myself in the shop. Shelley, my wife-to-be, was answering the phone, and she came out and she said, "Oh, the Bible Speaks is on the phone." I'd never heard of the Bible Speaks. And I said, "What do they want?" And she said, "Oh, something about fire escape." So I quipped, "Well, the Bible speaks, money talks," and took the call and put a number of them on. But when we went to tour Ventford Hall...
Yeah, stop and let's just tell the audience that what he's talking about is the same building at different times in history. So he was going for the first time to
Correct.
Ventford Hall. Okay, which
Yes.
is now the Museum of the Gilded Age.
Yes, it is. At that time, it had been through several variety of ownerships, and it had the Folkine Ballet Camp had just left it open for sale, and the Bible Speaks bought it. Well, they didn't need a fire escape, So, and I could use every job I could get at the time, but it never left my mind. In fact, I didn't even get too much of a tour when they realized I didn't need one. They kind of got rid of me because it was with the building inspector, the fire inspector. So I got to look at several of the other cottages. Spring Lawn was one that I did put fire escapes across the back, and all I could do was really peek in the windows while I drilled holes in the building.
Yeah, the entrance hall in Spring Lawn is fairly fantastic. Beautiful.
I did. I was involved in some artwork and metal fabrication, so built for some notable artists, and I was asked to make a railing that looked appropriate for that front parlor and
oh, how nice.
at Spring Lawn, and that was their main office of the Bible Speak. So I made a short railing for them too there, and so all the while, that's the mid-'70s. I just have my nose to the grindstone, building this business, and fortunately I got a partner in 1980, and we made a great combination, and really started making some money, and so all the while I'm thinking about the cottages. I'd been around to some. Fernbrook was for sale in the mid-'70s, $150,000. I didn't have $1,500. I'm trying to start a welding business, but I'm looking, I'm scheming, I'm wanting one of these things, or somehow you can't get them out of your mind. And of course, your book came along in about 84.
That's right.
And that was just when things were starting to make money, and it was doing pretty well by the late 80s. But even then, now. Cottages aren't $150,000. They're moving up. They're beyond me. Sort of like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It just keeps moving.
It's like that rabbit or whatever at the
the
dog races. It's just they keep just out of the reach of the doggy.
And I had no concept of nonprofit. I've always been sort of a profit-minded person. So. And with the hotel background, how can this be a hotel or something? And that gets even more complicated and less viable in reality. So it just festered. But in the late 80s, I couldn't buy one, but I was making money, so I decided I'd build my own cottage. And the shingle style is what I picked because that just had it all. Elm Court's a shingle style house, and that's sort of that's the major item in the Berkshires. The cottage is one that stands out. It's the largest, and a lot of good history there too.
Yeah.
So all the while is not just the building and the architecture, but the history interested me, so much. And your book brought a lot of that out. I keep using some of the unusual quotes and stories and tell that you did have in your book about the characters that some of the people were.
Let's share a little bit. Elm Court was built by Emily Thorne Vanderbilt Sloan. Her husband, William Douglas Sloan, was in partnership with his brother John, and that was the Sloan Furniture Company in New York, which remained in business until the 1960s. So pretty good business. And what they really were selling was imitations of the things that the Gilded Age elite were buying. So instead of a Sheraton chair, it was a knockoff of a Sheraton chair. And instead of an imported Oriental rug, it was a Karastan, which was, again, a knockoff. And it was a very solid, very good business, and the two brothers built two houses, Wyndhurst, which locals know as Cranwell, and Elm Court.
Interesting, the Schroeder furniture on what was called the Miracle Mile on Long Island had a W.J. Sloan furniture
Right.
They
were everywhere.
Diagonally across the road, and my father referred to it as different and sort of more upscale. They sold really the finest furniture, largest stickly dealer on Long Island. But there, that name Sloan, that came right back again when, the interest in Elm Court. And of course, the famous quote of Mrs. Astor's that just because we buy our rugs for them doesn't mean they can walk on them. It's just so indicative of some of the interesting sayings.
Right, because the Vanderbilts were considered new money, and Henry Vanderbilt, not Cornelius, it's reported wrong always, was really the richest of the Vanderbilts, and he was completely asocial. He was shy, and he really didn't care about going out. So I'm not sure who was snubbing whom.
It's hard to tell, but it makes for great stories. So when the late 80s came and I had this interesting real estate opportunity to sell the house we had and then build, I chose the shingle style and started building Deer Lawn. I'm going to build my own cottage.
Good for you.
So unusual rooms had to be in there: conservatory, drawing room, library, billiard room, staff kitchen. And I later on, as it developed and we started to do better, I could upgrade the finishes. So now we get period wallpapers and finishings and constantly buying antiques. There's not a modern piece in the house, and that would include fixtures and lighting. And I'd like to get pieces with provenance. Happy to have a piece that was in Elm Court and other
and you have a
pieces.
Website where people can kind of see what you accomplished.
When I learned what a computer was, really late in the game, I did make a website, deerlawn.org, and there
if you visit it, the pictures are very, very nice, and I understand from having tea with you the other day that we may even be getting some new pictures, and that would be lovely.
Always something new. There's always something getting remodeled, and there are more rooms to picture, but there's also more things to highlight on the website, such as Ventfort Hall.
Let's talk a minute about that, and then I have an important question for you. So now tell us about Ventfort Hall and your involvement and what the future hopes are.
Sure. In some ways, I'm a bit naive, and I didn't really know how to approach Ventfort Hall. I called it a bold move to walk in there and say, I have some great pieces of furniture. Would you would you be interested in any? And I think a lot of offers are given, but furniture's not exactly what Ventfort needs so much. And in meeting with the director over that, I realized that funds were really needed here. That this was
the director
Wendy Healy,
right?
And she was pretty new on the job when I got there, and it also seemed timely because at the time Ventfort was going through really a renaissance of interest, and this was the first executive director. It had been a very grassroots operation. You were part of that, and so was Chiazza Sprague, who I'm thrilled to be able to work with.
Absolutely.
So I made a pledge of money, and I wasn't sure if it was substantial or of any interest, but the reaction of Wendy, it was very.
She was thrilled to meet you.
She was significant, but of course I came with my cottager wannabe story, which there's more to the buildings, as I said, of the people. So I found myself just sort of playing in our own style. We talk about our staff. Well, that's someone who helps with the house 2 days a week. And the people that mow the lawn, of course, you contract someone, but you call them your staff, And so I had that story.
Let me just say a word about Ventfort. Ventfort Hall was built by J.P. Morgan's sister, Sarah, who also married someone named Morgan, so that she was kind of Sarah Morgan. And in order to build that house, they moved the original vent fort across the street. The reason they did that is whether they were early Berkshire cottages or later Berkshire cottages, they were sited for the views. So in order to have the second vent fort have the lovely setting and the lovely views, they had to move the first one. Sarah and George were entertainers. It's a house in many ways built for entertaining. They were also did not leave a big footprint in the Berkshires. Sarah died way too soon after completion of the house. So it's kind of a little bit of background on, and the much more interesting thing about Ventfort is the architecture itself, which is unique. And it was Roach and Tilden, but they selected a Gothic-related style, which was very unusual in any of the resort communities.
Correct. Yeah, most of them are Beaux Arts or the shingle style, like Gnome Keg.
Or Italianate.
Italianate, of course. Yeah. And actually, its design led a little bit to its problems as being a 5-layer of brick structure and built somewhat hastily right through the winter. Today, when we do masonry, there's tight controls on the temperature and all throughout it. So there's some speculation that, that made it require much more maintenance.
Yeah.
So there has been great deterioration. It was brought back from what I considered looked like really abandonment. It was scheduled for demolition.
Yeah, when Marcy Brown and Tiasha Sprague and I walked in that building, as you know, there was a hole in the roof that went straight through the building, and you could stand in one spot and look up at the sky and look down at the basement. It ran right through it. And the brick walls at the back and at this side were leaning the way my hands are now. So we certainly got hold of Ventfort Hall, but we had no idea what we had hold of. It was kind of, and I have to say, I was the first executive director. I had a card and everything.
Oh, good. I didn't know that you corrected on that.
Well, that's right. I wasn't paid, but I did have the card.
That's
it's something.
It's something, right? It's the satisfaction you can get out of these, being associated with these cottages in any way. So, essentially, I always wanted one. I couldn't afford it. I was inspired. I made enough money to be a 0.1% of a Vanderbilt and built a cottage. And now I think with Ventfort Hall, I'm really getting to play out the experience. So I had the construction background. I was readily snapped up, I guess, just not for so much the financial contribution, but I can bring a lot to the table.
I think both.
I like projects, and I like getting over there with my own equipment, so taking part in the paving and the redoing of the walkways and some of the upgrades, anything that can be made of steel, I can contribute. And I was asked to join the board, which was quite an honor, and then chair the restoration committee. And now, as we plan through projects, there's, I see the need for a lot more funds to get to the ultimate goal, which is a complete restoration of Ventfort Hall. And
I'm sure they appreciate you for all of it. But I appreciate you. I want an answer to this question. What do you think? It's a little bit different, but a little bit the same. It's kind of like a second Gilded Age. I wonder if it's time for a second edition, or not a second edition, a republishing of Berkshire Cottages.
I would think so. And particularly there are some things in there that have changed. I know your last line on the Elm Court section was the inexorable leading of nature reclaiming its own. Looks like Elm Court is not going to rot away.
Right, thank goodness.
And that's, so there's a correction or a change that a lot has occurred since your book was written. And the cottages have been a little bit differently defined to where I'd sure be glad to read it. And I think many others would.
I think, well, and I think, and there's another thing that these houses were enormously expensive for the time. In a time where a blue-collar worker earned $1 a day and a white-collar worker earned $2 a day, Benford Hall cost $250,000 without the land and without any of the subsequent additions. So you can imagine how striking they were in the landscape then. And as Lou has told us, he was still struck by them many years later. And now we're building that way again, and we're building that way again in the Berkshires. And it might be interesting to report on some of those, including yours.
Well, that would be quite an honor.
We'll have to think about that.
I believe Deer Lawn was built really for myself and my family, but to get out and spread it around and foster more interest, be a reference for that. Maybe somebody else had the same dream, and would like to hear about that.
Well, I want to thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Carol.
It was a great pleasure.
This is.